This is the big one. GB News can confirm that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has relocated to a property on the Sandringham estate belonging...
After years inside a 30-room estate, he slipped away under the cover of night. No cameras, no ceremony, no farewell. What seemed like a quiet relocation quickly revealed something deeper, a shift in power, status, and silence itself. Because this time, tradition didn't protect him, and the consequences were impossible to ignore. The night he left Royal Lodge wasn't announced, photographed, or even acknowledged in real time. Long after sunset on a cold February evening in 2026, he slipped away from the sprawling Windsor Great Park residence that had defined his life for more than 2 decades. No waving staff, no official farewell, just dim lights, quiet movement, and a departure time carefully to avoid the glare of daylight. Those familiar with the situation would later suggest the timing wasn't accidental. Leaving in full view of cameras would have transformed a relocation into a public spectacle, and humiliation was something he seemed determined to avoid. For years, Royal Lodge stood as a symbol of stability, at least outwardly. 30 rooms stretched across vast grounds, a place tied to privilege and permanence. Even as controversy built around him and public perception shifted, he remained rooted there, clinging to an arrangement that had once felt untouchable. Reports suggested he hoped to delay any move until later in the year, perhaps easing the transition quietly. But pressure behind palace walls doesn't always move slowly. When scrutiny intensified again, plans that once felt flexible became urgent, and the exit accelerated faster than anyone expected. The relocation itself unfolded with almost surgical precision. Vehicles arrived discreetly. Belongings were moved without spectacle, and neighbors were given little indication that a significant chapter was ending. The symbolism, however, was impossible to ignore. A man who once represented the monarchy across continents, attending diplomatic dinners, walking red carpets, shaking hands with world leaders, was now choosing darkness over exposure. Silence replaced ceremony, and absence replaced applause. His destination, Wood Farm Cottage on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, carried its own quiet meaning. Unlike the grandeur of Royal Lodge, Wood Farm had long been associated with retreat rather than prominence, a place tied more to privacy than public life. On paper, the move sounded dignified, even practical, a quieter environment away from relentless attention. Yet beneath that framing lingered a deeper reality. This wasn't simply a change of address. It was a visible shift in status, shaped by scrutiny, fatigue, and the growing sense that his place within royal life had fundamentally changed. What made the moment particularly striking was how little needed to be said. There were no dramatic confrontations, no fiery statements in the palace, no public condemnation. Instead, meaning emerged through absence. No official send-off, no reassuring narrative, no attempt to dress the move as a celebratory new chapter. The quiet execution spoke louder than any headline. It suggested that even within an institution built on tradition and optics, certain departures are handled not with grandeur, but with careful distance. As the gates of Royal Lodge closed behind him, the symbolism deepened. For decades, the residence had represented continuity, a physical anchor connecting past privilege with present identity. Leaving it under such conditions marked more than relocation. It signaled the end of an era that once felt permanent. The move hinted at a monarchy increasingly aware of public perception, one willing to allow silence itself to carry the message. Wood Farm, intended as a temporary refuge, quickly became something else entirely, a testing ground for how far the shift had gone. Before he even settled in, whispers suggested the atmosphere there would be different, less insulated, less deferential, less defined by unquestioned hierarchy. The contrast between what he left behind and what awaited him was stark. Royal Lodge had been a world built around status, Wood Farm would operate on entirely different terms. And that difference raised an unsettling question. If leaving Royal Lodge marked the end of one chapter, what new reality was waiting behind the quiet walls of Sandringham? Because sometimes the most dramatic changes don't arrive with confrontation. They arrive through subtle rules, silent decisions, and a shift so quiet that its impact isn't felt until it's already irreversible. When he arrived at Sandringham, there were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations waiting at the door. Instead, the shift revealed itself through something far quieter, a subtle rule change that altered the atmosphere around him almost instantly. Staff at the estate had reportedly been given clear guidance. They were not obligated to serve him if they felt uncomfortable. No protest, no defiance, just permission. And that single adjustment carried more weight than any public statement ever could. Royal households have always operated on tradition. Roles are clearly defined, and service is built into the structure itself. For decades, he had lived at the center of that system, surrounded by people whose duties were shaped by hierarchy rather than personal preference. At Sandringham, that certainty dissolved. Deference was no longer automatic. Instead, individual comfort mattered, and for some staff members, that meant quietly stepping back. The change wasn't loud, but its symbolism was unmistakable. Respect that had once been institutionalized had become conditional. What made this moment particularly striking was how procedural it felt. There was no public drama, no official declaration condemning anyone. The palace didn't order staff to refuse service. It simply acknowledged that choice now belonged to them. That distinction mattered. It shifted responsibility away from the institution and onto personal conscience, allowing boundaries to exist where tradition once erased them. For someone raised in an environment where service was assumed, the adjustment would have felt profound, even disorienting. Sources described the situation bluntly, suggesting that several staff members had already decided to keep their distance, not out of hostility, but unease, a quiet reflection of how public controversies had reshaped private spaces. Doors still opened, routines continued, and daily life moved forward, yet something intangible had changed. The rhythm of royal living, once seamless and predictable, now carried hesitation beneath the surface. Even small interactions, the kind that once passed without notice, became reminders of a new reality. The contrast with the past was impossible to ignore. There was a time when he moved through royal residences with effortless authority, surrounded by layers of protocol that ensured comfort and protection. At Sandringham, that protective layer no longer existed in the same way. He wasn't insulated by a dedicated household, nor shielded from the emotional climate around him. Instead, he faced an environment shaped by individual choice, a subtle but powerful signal that his standing had shifted beyond simple titles or formal roles. And perhaps that was what made the moment feel so heavy. No one announced a fall from grace. No decree spelled out the consequences. The message arrived through absence. Conversations that didn't happen, services that weren't automatically offered, routines that felt noticeably quieter. Silence replaced ceremony. And in that silence, the depth of change became impossible to ignore. It wasn't punishment in the traditional sense. It was acknowledgement, an acknowledgement that expectations surrounding him had fundamentally shifted. For an institution often criticized for protecting its own at all costs, the move suggested a different approach, one rooted less in confrontation and more in distance. By allowing personal boundaries to take precedence, the monarchy appeared to be redefining loyalty itself. Service was no longer blind. It was thoughtful, conditional, shaped by the broader context surrounding him. And that shift, though subtle, echoed far beyond the walls of Wood Farm. As days passed, the quiet rule change began to feel less like a temporary adjustment and more like a permanent recalibration. The relocation no longer resembled a dignified pause in public life. Instead, it carried the weight of exile without the formality, a life lived on the margins of a world he once stood at the center of. The absence of ceremony made the transformation even more striking. No grand announcement declared the end of an era, yet everyone could sense that something irreversible had taken place. And that raises a deeper question. How does someone born into power, someone who once stood firmly within the core of royal life, arrive at a moment defined not by ceremony, but by quiet distance? To understand that shift, you have to look back, long before Sandringham, before controversy, before silence replaced applause, to the rise that made the fall feel so dramatic in the first place. Born at Buckingham Palace in February 1960, he entered a world defined by ceremony, expectation, and inherited power. From the very beginning, his life unfolded within the rarefied atmosphere of royal tradition, uniforms, public appearances, and an identity shaped long before he could understand its weight. As the third child of a reigning monarch, his position carried both privilege and visibility, placing him firmly within the inner circle of royal life. For years, that sense of permanence felt unquestionable, as though the structure around it would always remain intact. As he grew older, he began to carve out a public image that worked in his favor. His service as a helicopter pilot during the Falklands War transformed him into something more than a ceremonial figure. For a time, he was seen as a modern royal willing to step forward and take personal risks, a narrative that resonated strongly with the public. That period elevated his reputation, casting him as disciplined and courageous, a prince whose identity extended beyond palace walls. Praise came easily, and with it, a deeper sense of belonging within the institution he represented. The momentum continued into the late 1980s when his marriage to Sarah Ferguson captured global attention. The wedding felt like a fresh chapter for the monarchy, filled with energy and optimism. Together, they became parents to 2 daughters, and for a while, the image of family life softened public perception, reinforcing the idea of a royal household evolving with the times. Even as challenges emerged within the marriage, his position inside the royal structure appeared steady. Titles remained, residences remained, and his presence at official engagements continued without interruption. At one point, he stood second in line to the throne, a fact that shaped how he was treated and how he moved through the world. State dinners, overseas tours, and diplomatic meetings weren't occasional highlights. They were routine. He represented the crown abroad, met influential figures, and occupied spaces that symbolized continuity and authority. Access came naturally, supported by layers of protocol that ensured comfort and respect wherever he went. For years, that environment reinforced a belief that status within the monarchy was not only inherited but enduring. Even after his marriage ended, the system around him seemed to absorb pressure effortlessly. Criticism surfaced occasionally, but it rarely translated into meaningful consequences. The institution had a way of maintaining stability, shielding its members from a full force of public scrutiny. Invitations continued, appearances remained, and daily life carried on with familiar rhythms. Looking back, that period now feels almost untouchable, a time when controversy appeared manageable and the foundations beneath him felt solid. What makes the contrast with the present so striking is how complete that earlier rise once was. He didn't hover at the edges of royal life. He stood firmly at its center. Access to power wasn't symbolic. It was practical, visible in the homes he lived in, the roles he performed, and the expectations that surrounded him. That level of inclusion created a sense of permanence that few ever questioned, including perhaps himself. But permanence inside an institution built on image can be fragile. Over time, confidence hardened into expectation, and protection began to feel like entitlement. Associations formed quietly in the background, relationships and decisions that seemed inconsequential at first but would later carry enormous consequences. In hindsight, the warning signs appear clearer than they did in the moment. Small controversies that once faded quickly began to linger, resurfacing again and again until they formed a pattern impossible to ignore. The shift didn't happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, almost invisibly, as public attitudes evolved and scrutiny intensified. What had once been dismissed as background noise gradually became the dominant narrative. Applause faded into skepticism, and the distance between public reception and royal protection began to shrink. For someone accustomed to moving through a world defined by deference, that change felt unfamiliar, perhaps even surreal. And yet, despite the growing tension, nothing seemed capable of breaking the illusion entirely. The structure around him still stood, the titles remained intact, and the idea of a complete fall from grace felt almost unthinkable. Until one moment, a single decision that would place him directly in front of the cameras transformed years of quiet controversy into something impossible to control. Because sometimes, the turning point isn't a scandal itself, but the moment someone tries to explain it. The turning point that followed didn't arrive with a single headline. It unfolded through accumulation. By the time legal settlements, memoirs, and renewed investigations began dominating public conversation, the atmosphere around him had already shifted. What once felt like a manageable controversy evolved into a persistent shadow that refused to fade. Each development added another layer of scrutiny, tightening the space in which he could exist without attention. Quietly, The idea of rehabilitation began to feel less realistic, replaced by a growing sense that the institution itself needed distance. The legal settlement reached in early 2022 was presented as closure, a way to draw a line under years of dispute. Official statements emphasized finality, carefully avoiding any admission of wrongdoing while suggesting a desire to move forward. Yet closure on paper rarely translates into closure in public memory. Instead, the agreement became another reference point discussed, analyzed, and debated long after the headlines moved on, rather than silencing the narrative. It reinforced the perception that the controversy had entered a new phase, one shaped less by speculation and more by consequence. Then came a shift that altered the emotional tone of the entire story. The tragic death of Virginia Giuffre in 2025 reframed public conversation almost overnight. Sympathy deepened, and the focus moved away from legal technicalities toward the human cost of prolonged detention and trauma. For the monarchy, the moment carried an added weight. What had once been discussed and distant, procedural language now felt personal and immediate. Public patience thinned, and silence from certain corners of royal life began to feel heavier than before. Later that same year, the release of a posthumous memoir reignited global attention. The book didn't introduce entirely new claims, but it reshaped the narrative through lived experience, bringing emotional clarity to a story that had often felt abstract. Media coverage surged again. Interviews resurfaced, and conversations that once seemed to be fading returned with renewed intensity. For him, the timing couldn't have been worse. Any hope that distance might allow the story to fade quietly disappeared, replaced by a fresh wave of scrutiny that felt impossible to outrun. Inside royal circles, pressure quietly built. Decisions that once felt postponable began to look inevitable. The institution had long balanced tradition with public perception, but the balance was shifting. Each new headline reinforced a growing belief that association itself had become a liability. And when that realization finally reached its peak, the response came not through spectacle, but through a decisive administrative act. Titles were removed, roles erased, and a century-old precedent was broken with a brief, pointed statement. The impact of that moment was profound. Titles within the monarchy are more than ceremonial. They define access, authority, and belonging. Losing them signaled a clear boundary, one that redefined a position not just publicly but internally. Residences once defended became difficult to justify, and long-standing arrangements began to unravel. What followed wasn't dramatic exile, but something quieter. Invitations disappeared, appearances stopped, and the protective layer that once surrounded him dissolved almost entirely. Just as the situation seemed to reach a final chapter, another wave arrived. In early 2026, the release of extensive files connected to the Epstein investigation reignited global attention. The sheer scale of the documents ensured headlines would dominate for weeks, and familiar names resurfaced under renewed scrutiny. Political voices called for answers, and investigators began reviewing details line by line. For the monarchy, the timing felt relentless, coming just as it had attempted to draw a definitive line between the institution and the man it once supported. By then, the shift was undeniable. The story had moved beyond individual controversy into something larger, a question about how an ancient institution adapts when public trust wavers. And as the spotlight intensified once again, his relocation to a farm no longer looked like a temporary retreat. It felt like the closing scene before a quieter, more uncertain reality began, one where silence, not ceremony, would define what came next. Wood Farm Cottage was never meant to feel permanent. Tucked quietly within the Sandringham estate, it lacked the grandeur and symbolism that had defined his previous residences. On paper, the move sounded temporary, a practical solution, while other arrangements were considered. But from the moment he settled in, the atmosphere made it clear that this wasn't simply a pause between chapters. It was a complete reset of expectations, status, and daily reality. Life at Wood Farm operated differently from anything he had known before. There was no dedicated household built entirely around his comfort, no automatic layer of ceremony guiding each interaction. Staff were present, but their roles were no longer defined by obligation. Some chose to assist, others quietly stepped away, and that absence of automatic service carried a deeper symbolism. For the first time, the rhythms of royal life were shaped less by hierarchy and more by personal choice. It wasn't loud or confrontational, just a quiet shift that changed everything. What made this new environment so striking was its normality. There were no official announcements outlining new rules, no grand explanation offered to the public. The change simply existed, visible through small details. Fewer formalities, fewer structured appearances, and long stretches of silence where royal routines once filled the calendar. Wood Farm didn't feel like a stage. It felt like a boundary, a space where the institution created distance without needing to say so openly. Public attention inevitably returned to the privileges he once held. The Royal Lodge arrangement, long criticized for its generous terms, became a symbol of a past era when status provided insulation from scrutiny. Compared to the vast estate he had occupied for years, Wood Farm felt modest, almost understated. That contrast told its own story. The man who once lived surrounded by expansive grounds and constant activity now moved through a quieter landscape, one where visibility was limited and expectations were restrained. Inside royal circles, the conversation had shifted as well. Rehabilitation was no longer a topic of discussion. Instead, the focus turned toward containment, maintaining distance while allowing him to live privately. Invitations that once arrived routinely had disappeared, replaced by a cautious silence. It wasn't hostility, it was absence. And sometimes, absence speaks louder than any public declaration. The monarchy, an institution built on continuity, appeared to be signaling that certain chapters don't end with confrontation. They simply fade into the background. Yet even in that quiet environment, the weight of history remained present. Digital records, public memory, and years of controversy ensured that a story could not disappear entirely. Each new development, each resurfaced headline, reminded observers that the transition to Wood Farm wasn't just about location. It was about perception. How a figure once defined by ceremony now existed largely outside it. The shift from privilege to permission felt subtle on the surface, but profound underneath. And perhaps that is what makes this chapter feel so final. There was no dramatic exile, no sweeping declaration marking the end of royal influence. Instead, there was a slow, careful withdrawal, a life reshaped by distance rather than confrontation. Wood Farm became less of a refuge and more of a marker, a visible line separating past authority from present reality. Once surrounded by ceremony, he now moved through quieter days where even small gestures carried new meaning. So what does this move really signal? Is it the closing chapter of a royal story that once felt permanent? Or simply another twist in a narrative that refuses to end quietly? That question remains open, shaped as much by public perception as by palace decisions. One thing, however, feels undeniable. The silence surrounding Wood Farm speaks volumes about how far the journey has gone. If you followed the story from beginning, you've seen how quickly power, tradition, and public trust can shift. Now we'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you see this moment as an ending or the start of something even more unexpected? Share your perspective below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe, and stay with us for the next story where silence may once again reveal more than words ever could.